Certainly, Arne Slot is flying as the manager of Liverpool. And what a performance it was last night as they beat Real Madrid for the first time in, I think, something like 13 years or something like that. And I wonder whether or not now, after sweeping Madrid aside to go top of the Champions League table, they really are the best team in Europe right now. Certainly something that Jude Bellingham suggested yesterday night. But Arne Slot was keen to play down the significance of the victory.
You know how special it is to play against a club that won this Champions League so many times and are the reigning champions as well. Dominated Europe for the last few years. We're a pain in the ass for Liverpool many times as well. So we knew it was a big week, but I said if this week is over, next week is a big week again with Newcastle and Everton. So, but I think it's not only the result, also the way we played is, it's pleasing to see.
If you were the sporting director or the owner of Liverpool and you'd appointed Arne Slot, how self-satisfied would you be right now?
I would feel entirely validated at this moment in time. I think it shows the legacy that Klopp has built, because ultimately the job that Klopp had done, I think Klopp, for me, was a brilliant manager. I think he probably gets a lot more cachet than his achievements probably merit. Because, you know, you look at the trophy haul, of course, if he didn't have somebody across the northwest like Guardiola, he probably would have won a lot more. But actually going out of Liverpool, I think 6 major trophies over a 9-year period is not quite as staggering as the reputation.
It's quite significant,
of course it's significant, but when you're comparing it, you know, in terms of what other people have done, in terms of Pep Guardiola, I think you have to get some context to it. But what he did for Liverpool was remarkable in terms of.
I was going to say, you have to paint the context in the fact they hadn't won the league for 30 years, and then
yes,
he did.
Of course, and the fact they hadn't won the league for 30 years is something you have to look at, because that was, you know, remarkable in of itself that Liverpool hadn't won it for 30 years, given the dominance of the 70s and 80s. Look, I mean. This argument, I just think it's silly. I don't want to get into conversations about whether they're the best team in the world or not. I think that's a silly characterisation. At this moment in time, they're in very good form. And if you are the top of your respective league, and people will argue, and I think rightly so, that this is probably the most competitive domestic league in European football, and then you're top of the Champions League, then doesn't take much of a Mensa candidate to work out that right now you probably are the form team in European football. But these are marathons, and Madrid. This is not Madrid as we know it right
very
now.
Injured Madrid.
This is a Madrid that there's enough quality on that field to be incredibly competitive.
Yeah, but you've got a midfielder playing at right back. You've got a kid playing at centre half.
Sure,
you've got
but these are still top class footballers that are capable of adapting to certain circumstances.
Injured.
But they got their heads handed to them by Milan 2 weeks ago at the Bernabeu. So we've got to get our context
Mbappe hasn't
here.
Settled properly, you know.
I couldn't care less about Mbappe. I think he's a bloody pest. I think he's a very good
player. But if you've invested the money that you have in your Real Madrid, you would expect him a bit more.
The irony of it is that we've got people like Javier Tebas that run that league, constantly talking about how the economic future of football is being destroyed by the Premier League, and ultimately how much money is being spent by the clubs inside the Premier League. Yeah, it's his bloody league that spends the most ridiculous amount of money on players and engages with players at those levels. So Mbappe needs to concentrate on what he's doing, because ultimately, great save, but penalties should be scored, and so should Mo Salah score his penalty. I'll give a bit more dispensation to Salah because he hits a post rather than the goalkeeper making a great save. But, you know, you look at this situation, you say, brilliant. I think it'll be a compelling game on the weekend. You can't see Liverpool not coming out of this game without a win if you look at current form. But you know what? You write Manchester City and Pep Guardiola off at your peril. Yeah. Nothing would surprise me in this game. Liverpool are having everything their own way, and deservedly so. And Slot is doing everything, I think, right now. I don't think if Trent Alexander-Arnold were to leave and go, if that was an audition whilst he's sitting from the bench watching who he might play for next year, I mean, Trent Alexander-Arnold might want to think about what he's doing.
Well, it's interesting because yesterday when we were discussing this, the Liverpool fans said to us, out of the 3 players that they had that they would afford to leave, he could go. And I was like, whoa, he's terrific. But then I watched the game last night and I thought maybe that geezer was right, because Conor Bradley, his progression has been so steep, but also the way he slotted into that team, the ball into McAllister for last night, the one-touch pass was terrific.
This is a good team, it's good players. I mean, you don't want to lose Trent Alexander-Arnold.
Of course not.
But you don't also, is it going to be a catastrophe if you do? I don't think it is.
Well, you're not going to indulge him and make him the highest paid player at the expense of Salah or Van Dijk in order to keep him when you've got someone who can play to a level.
With due respect to what these players are getting paid, you've got to pay them what the market wants to pay them. And if they can get something significant somewhere else, you either have to match it or find a mechanism that gives you an opportunity to keep the player. If he wants to go, let him go. And I don't think Trent Alexander-Arnold is as important economically because of the stage he's at his career. But if you're going to keep him until he's 30, then the economics are going to go out the window anyway. So the only reason you put him on a longer-term contract is because you're protecting him for two reasons. One, you want to keep him in your camp, and B, you want to protect his economic value. And by the time you protect his economic value at 29, 30 years of age, his economic value has already deteriorated. So I would suggest that the most important two signings are Virgil van Dijk and Mo Salah, and I think they'll do both of those.
I wonder what the Liverpool fans make of it. 03717223344. I was a little bit concerned that Bradley had to come off towards the end of the game. I don't know if it was an actual hamstring injury or he's having a little bit of cramp, but it didn't look great for him. The blips, I suppose, also include Konate because he had to be helped off the pitch towards the end. The last thing they'll want is a defensive problem going into the game against Manchester City at the weekend.
Of course, but they'll have to deal with the cards that they're handed, won't they? And coming off the field having won a game that is more important, I suspect. Well, coming off the field having won a game and having all your players intact will be the most important thing. But coming off the field having won the game, and if you've got a couple of things that are challenging for you, then that's what big managers deal with, and that's what big clubs have: big squads, big players, big opportunities. You've got Man City in no form whatsoever right now, no confidence. They can score goals. Everyone was talking about, Haaland doesn't score. Just scored 2 goals against Feyenoord.
The issue is defensively with them; they concede.
Well, there was an issue also about the fact that that Haaland, or there were certain sections of the media observing that he'd only scored 2 goals in 7 games. And I thought that was silly because ultimately he's going to score goals.
The problem with them, if they do have a goal-scoring problem, it's not him. It's the fact that nobody else scores goals for them apart from him. That would be an issue.
Fine. If he scores 40 goals a season, there's not too many people who need to contribute that much, is there?
Talking about big guns taking their eye off the ball, maybe being a little bit complacent. I'm looking at the Champions League table now. Bayern Munich are 13th. Manchester City 17th, Juventus 19th. You have to scroll down to 24th to find Real Madrid and 25th to find PSG. Have some of these big clubs taken this expanded Champions League for granted, thinking, well, we don't have to try as hard early on because we'll get through no matter what?
I don't know if they think that, because ultimately I think that you approach every game to win, don't you? And you certainly don't expect to see Madrid getting beaten at home by AC Milan. And you certainly don't expect to see some of the results that you've seen. I think it's an interesting format. I think it's, whether it's new or it's actually genuinely more competitive.
Better format?
I think it is. I'm enjoying it more. I don't know what you think. I'm enjoying it more.
Yeah.
I didn't know. I'm not going to be overly fascinated to see 2 Belarusian teams play one another, but I am fascinated to see a whole raft of teams.
But there's always a big game. There's always a massive game.
It would appear to be.
And the other thing about it is actually you don't get sort of repetition. So I know, although that I can understand the mechanic of the previous Champions League, I don't necessarily want to see Liverpool against Sturm Graz twice.
No. And of course, with the dynamic that you're playing teams, you've not got the home and away dynamic of the fixture. It creates a different feel. Of course, we've got different clubs in there. We've seen Villa bring an energy to it because we've seen Villa beat Bayern Munich. We've seen them now get a point off Juventus
and Brest.
Absolutely,
Sporting.
Absolutely. I do think it's an interesting format, and this in and of itself might explain why we're seeing certain results manifest themselves differently. Of course, given the nature of this structure, the first 8 get in and seed and away they go. The next 16 get into a playoff situation, and you'd still, even if you found yourself as a Madrid, a PSG, a Bayern Munich in that structure of 16 teams outside of the top 8 that have already qualified, you'd still pick those clubs to come through.
But I think what's really interesting is that the big games that those what you would call lesser clubs play are one-off matches instead of being over 2 matches, so they get confidence if they do end up getting a good result, so that when they do go into those 2-legged affairs, they've already been through that experience before, and they've got that in their muscle memory.
It's also working out slightly more, teams like Celtic, because Celtic have constantly been the whipping boys of getting into the Champions League.
What did you think about that last? Oh, we'll come back to that in just a second, because Martin O'Neill's going to join us, but that was a bad goal to concede, wasn't it?
Of course it was.
Crikey.
And people will look at the fact that Club Brugge was there to be beaten because they'll expect them to have won that game because of the result against Leipzig. But it's still a good point.
Yeah.
Because Club Brugge aren't mugs.
Jim White and Simon Jordan. Monday to Friday mornings from 10 on AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.